In the late 80s, a friendship between two game designers was forged behind the Iron Curtain. It was a friendship that would make one of these men famous, the other rich, and make Nintendo's Game Boy the most successful games machine ever. The key to that friendship was a game called Tetris. In 1988, Dutch-born game designer and publisher Henk Rogers was in the business of importing new games to Japan.
I first found Tetris in 1988 at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which is what I did. I used to go around the shows and find the games that I liked and bring them back to Japan. That was the business I was in. I played it, and then I went away and came back and played it again, and I went away and I came back and played it again. There was a really solid core game there. I just went after the game.
Now living in Seattle, Alexei Pajanov created Tetris in Moscow in 1984. Pajanov was working on artificial intelligence and voice recognition software, and originally designed Tetris as an exercise to test out a new computer.
My interest all the time was in small puzzles and games and all these small mathematical diversions.
Tetris was based on an ancient Roman puzzle called Pentamino.
There are 12 different shapes like that, and these are all the possible pieces made out of 5 squares.
Pajanov's simple version of Pentamino had pieces made from 4 squares instead of 5. He called it Tetris, from the Greek word tetra, meaning 4.
When I wrote the procedure which rotates at 90 degrees, I liked you push the keys and it chucks, push the key, chucks, and the idea of the game of real time come to me.
Pajanov's genius was to make Tetris a race against the clock. Completed lines were cleared from the screen, making it possible to carry on playing almost indefinitely. But as the pieces descended more and more quickly, the challenge got progressively harder.
As the game gets faster, your mind is no longer able to think that fast. Maybe it's your subconscious that's playing Tetris at this point, but it's playing faster than you can actually play. And I think athletes have this. We call it a zone.
Tetris spread like wildfire. A few months later, it was discovered in Hungary by software importer Robert Stein. Stein went to Moscow, where he met Alexei Pajanov and negotiated a license to publish the game.
For some unknown reason, he gave me his original Tetris. It was licensed to be published on everything. That's what I thought.
Tetris, the computer version of a Russian adaptation of an ancient Roman puzzle, was a smash hit everywhere.
When Tetris invaded the office, productivity went down to 0.
It eventually had to be banned.
In Japan, Henk Rogers released a version for Nintendo's home console.
We released this Tetris at the Christmas of 1988. We ended up selling 3 million.
And that was when Henk Rogers became one of just a handful of outsiders given a sneak preview of the new Game Boy handheld gaming system.
I said, I think I have the perfect game for Game Boy.
But Rogers faced stiff competition from Robert Stein to secure the handheld rights for Tetris.
Excuse me, I discovered this product, so shouldn't I have it?
And so I got on the next plane.
Without realizing it at the time, Rogers and Stein flew out to Moscow on exactly the same day. They stayed in the same hotel, but never saw each other.
The TV doesn't work. The radio doesn't work. Everybody's imagination about what it was like behind the Iron Curtain in those days. All those things were there. It was just very scary.
Rogers went to Moscow knowing nothing about the Soviet Union and speaking no Russian. He knew he was looking for an organization called Elorg, and that was it. To his surprise, he had no difficulty hiring an interpreter who spoke perfect English.
Your name is Allah. All these guys are KGB. There's no way that you're going to get an interpreter who's just there to help you do business.
This is the building,
Yeah,
yes?
this is the building, right. Every meeting has to be cleared through the KGB. And of course, I came out of the clear blue sky. Finally, Mr. Belikov came down, and I explained that I'm the one who published Tetris in Japan, and he said, "Which machine is this?" And I said, "It's for Nintendo." He says, "But we never gave these rights to anybody." I really thought that I was in deep kimchi for a large part of that time there, the beginning time, you know, because I was, in their eyes, I was a pirate.
Later that morning, Rogers met Alexei Pajitnov.
I introduce our other guest. Our other guest is Mr. Pajitnov.
Hello?
The world-famous Mr. Pajitnov.
World famous, why?
World-famous why? Because in the world...
I am Alexei Pajitnov.
We became friends very quickly because, you know, when you're talking about game design, you know, you have something, you have a common ground to talk about. And his English wasn't that good, but it was good enough.
Hank was the very first person who really loves and understood the game. And that's what I felt immediately.
Everybody, including Alexei in Moscow at this time, was paranoid that any conversation that was being had would be heard by people that shouldn't hear it. So anytime he wanted to really talk to me about something, he would wink, wink, or whatever, and we would go to the park.
Finally, the negotiations for the handheld rights for Tetris began.
Gosh, it was 8 to 10 people there, some of whom were definitely KGB, and it was total third degree. I was in that room and they were questioning me about everything.
What Rogers didn't know was that the Russians were also negotiating with Robert Stein in another room in the same building.
My objective was to try to get as much of the licenses, what is left, to be had.
Unknown to Stein or Rogers, the chairman of UK publishers Mirasoft, Kevin Maxwell, son of newspaper magnate Robert Maxwell, was also in Moscow.
Kevin was pulling strings. He's saying, if you don't do this deal with me, my dad's going to talk to Gorbachev and you guys are going to be in deep trouble. And that was his negotiating method.
But Rogers had Pajitnov on his side, and he had Nintendo's support to offer a generous deal.
4 days of negotiation and finally they said yes.
The deal was signed and Pajitnov and Rogers celebrated in the only Japanese restaurant in Moscow.
I hated him, and yet he just done what any businessman would have done, you know. Today, I have lost God knows how many millions of dollars, and I wasn't very happy about it.
The biggest winner was Nintendo. With Tetris as its packed-in game, 32 million Game Boys were sold around the world. As a Soviet citizen, Alexei Pajitnov earned nothing from the game, but he became world famous and emigrated to the United States. In 1996, when the original deals expired, Pajitnov finally earned his first royalties from the game. He and Henk Rogers are now in business, selling Tetris to a new generation of gamers on a new generation of hardware. With Tetris, the game industry finally came of age, and it made Nintendo, for a while at least, the most powerful entertainment company on the planet. From humble beginnings, computer game culture has evolved at an incredible rate, thanks to the vision and creativity of its pioneers. They understood how much we like, perhaps even need, to play games and explore new worlds. It's virtual living, and it's virtually unstoppable.
Next, Discovery Sunday explores 100 years of flight as Extreme Machines heads to Chicago's O'Hare Airport after the break.